live button. And let's go. Let's get the party started. So hello, planet Earth, and welcome. I'm Lilia, as you know, and my pronouns are she and hers. And thank you for joining us for the 12th episode of DM Maynard's reflective conversation series on gender affirmation for parents, partners, educators, and health providers, and more. Also, I'd like to just do a little shout out to Facialteam for allowing us to hijack this platform to educate y'all on all topics gender affirming. So as we always welcome amazing people in our community just in time for Trans Day of Visibility at the end of this month. And today to talk about the intersections of anti-trans violence and healing. So let me first introduce our real host today. It's not me, and creator of this series, DM Maynard from New York. Thank you for coming, Dee.
Oh, thank you for having me, Lil. Thank you so much. It's an honor. And thank you to Facialteam also.
And Dee is the author of a 3-part series of workbooks on navigating gender transition. So thank you for bringing so many voices, unique voices to this series now in its 12th episode. And also from the US, we have here Michael Munson of Forge. We'll learn a little bit more about that later, who has been doing some incredible work for many, many years. Welcome, Michael.
Hey, good to be here. Thank you.
So Dee, first, I'm going to hand it over to you now and let us know, if you could, how you met Michael.
Okay, so hi, Michael. Hi, Lil again. I had the pleasure of presenting at a conference in New York City. And sometimes you get downtime after you've prepared and you presented already and you're going to present again. And I always try to pop into other people's workshops and see what's going on. And I didn't really know anything about the work that Michael does with Forge. And I said, let me check this out. And, you know, sometimes you pop in, you pop out, you say, like, 10 minutes. I stayed the entire time. I was riveted from the first moment. The interpersonal ways that he and his team addressed the issues that we're going to talk about today in a safe space, which hard subjects that we talked about, which I want to say we're going to be speaking about violence, harassment, abuse on many different levels. So please, if anything's triggering or this is not age appropriate for certain people, parents, if you're watching, use your judgment, watch this first. Please, do that to just keep everybody's mental health and emotional health safe. So I went into this workshop, which Michael sets up as a very safe space. And the exercises that were done, I remember one of them in particular, Michael, that we were all asked to write a letter. And you said that we may not even remember that we were writing a letter to someone I won't give away all of it, if you want to share on that later, because, and when we would receive the letter back, because somebody's letter would come to each one of us, we wouldn't even remember this happened. And I thought, oh, I'm going to remember. Guess what? I didn't remember. And when I got it, it was one of those days that you just needed to pick me up. And it was just so beautiful and so touching. And I thought his work is so powerful. I don't even know if you realize the impact that you have on others. So that's how I met Michael. We became friends and stayed in touch. And then when I was writing my 3rd book, the education book, I knew I wanted to put his organization in the resource section. I think it's really important. So if people want to follow up with him and don't get a chance and have that book, the 3rd one, please look for Forge in the back. So Lil, that's,
Thanks for that explanation, Dee. And I'm just going to take advantage this moment to screen share here something with our viewers.
Okay.
And ta-da! Here are your books.
Oh. I'm like, what's going on here? Okay. Oh, thanks. Oh, so it's in the third book, Lil, the one that's the reflective workbook for teachers and support staff of trans and non-binary students. So Michael's information is in there in his organization.
Woohoo.
Okay, so I'm going to start to ask, we could take this down now, that's okay. Um, Thank you so much. So I just want to make sure that we have plenty of time for Michael. Michael, tell us a little bit about how Forge and your role in the organization.
Sure. I'd like to start for a second with a visual accessibility thing, just for folks that are listening, if you don't mind. So thank you for having me, first of all. And just for visual access, I'm a white appearing person with glasses and short hair and short beard that used to not be so short, a black shirt and a burgundy scarf in front of a black background, just to help folks orient if they need. So your question is kind of broad, which is great. So Forge is a national trans organization that focuses 100% of our work and effort on anti-violence related issues for and around trans folks. We started in 1994, and most of our work focuses on sexual assault, intimate partner violence, dating violence, stalking, and hate-motivated crimes as they relate to those other types of victimization. We really work to reduce the impact of trauma on trans and non-binary survivors and communities by empowering service providers, advocating for systems reform, and connecting survivors to healing possibilities. So when we look at our work, it's about 75% that we do with working with service providers, so training, technical assistance, and then about 25% of the time we work directly with trans community members who are survivors or who may have experienced some form of trauma. So that's the nutshell of.
Okay, so what led you to create Forge then?
Well, it's one of those things in 1994, the internet was kind of like Unix based, like all those non-graphic things, or AOL. So like 1994 was like the beginning of the internet. So, I mean, today, any trans person can go online and find almost anything that they want. But in 1994, there were people that were everywhere across the country going, hey, I want to connect with other people. How do I do that? So being part of the Midwest, so I live in Milwaukee right now, but Chicago's just 90 minutes away. There were a bunch of us that were like, well, we all were coming out as trans or some version of trans. And we're like, where do we go find support? Where do we get hormones if we want? How do we find a therapist? And we really just needed to have that connection with each other. So we started to meet as a kind of peer-led social support group. And that, that has maintained itself across the years, but that then shifted about 15 years ago or so to more of the work that we're doing now, which is really focused on anti-violence. But the work that we did in the beginning was really fun in a lot of ways. We got to have connections with people that we would never have really known were in the same kind of spot that we were in. And it was really lovely. And one of the things that, Dee, I think that is might be really important to you and the work that you do is that we looked at that trans space as really, really, really inclusive. And we still get a little bit of pushback today about it, because when we talk about trans spaces, we talk about trans spaces that include partners, family, loved ones as part of the community, not as allies, but as part of the community. And the more we've looked at anti-violence issues, we have to look at those people that surround and are part of that trans community, because violence impacts those people that are around the trans person as well as the trans person. So it's really a collective of a really broad community that we maintain.
That's what I noticed at the workshop, that you spoke about that, and that you understood that it takes a village, it takes a community, it takes all of us to support each other, and that the more people that are in everybody's corner, the better. And
Right.
I think that's what I love about Facialteam. I'm going to be going, Lil, I guess we could just say for next month, I will be doing it live with Lil in Spain. Oh my God. Okay. And so sorry. Oh my goodness. And what they are doing is I'm going to be educating people about helping family members, partners, educators. And that's what I noticed about your organization, is that you were doing the same type of thing. And so, do you want to get at any, it's up to you if you feel like you've already shared enough about it, the specifics about how you provide your services and what your ultimate goals are.
Sure. There's a couple, it's twofold. predominantly. So we mostly, like I mentioned, work with providers. So victim service providers, therapists, advocates, the whole kind of anybody that's in that role of helping professional. That's our primary audience that we work with. And we do so through training, technical assistance, those kinds of things. And then the other group of population is working with trans and non-binary community members. And again, that includes the whole spectrum of folks. And our purpose really is to increase knowledge and connect people to resources to support both providers and community members, pretty equally. We want to uphold both of them. And we do so through a trauma-informed lens and with an empowerment base. So both trauma-informedness and empowerment based work are really, really important. So like Dee, when you mentioned that, the workshop that you were in was a safe space. Well, I don't know how safe spaces are constructed, really. I mean, everybody feels differently in different spaces, but that's part of our job, is to be trauma informed, is to create a space that feels safe enough. And empowerment based is to create a space that feels safe enough for growth. So both of those things are really essential.
The safe space thing, I'm glad you brought that up, Michael, because I had the pleasure of leading 2 panels on Monday with Nassau County, with Nassau County Community College, and Michael was one of the panelists that we were able to get to come on. And one of the people who helped arrange everything talked about a post to me personally, saying how what she thought was great about the panel, and I feel like that's what I got out of your workshop, is that it really makes you feel like you're participating and that you're welcome and you're not judged and that you're part of the conversation. And for me, that's what a safe space is, that a person isn't judged for not knowing, because often people are embarrassed to speak. And then when they may not have the right vocabulary yet or as enough knowledge. And so when I speak of safe space, it's not so much that we know we're not going to be hit and hurt, which also, of course, we instill that. It's more a place that you don't get emotionally or psychologically harmed in any way, because we all know abuse and harassment and violence can happen in those ways as well. And there may be more subtle and not leave a visual mark, but emotional mark. So I think that, I'm just going to call the college NCC, because when I was growing up, it had a different name. It had 3 C's and now it has 2. I just want to say that's why I look like I stumbled and know the name of the college. So, okay. So one of the questions we talked about at that panel was based on yes, Lil.
Just want to pop in on the topic before you move on, Dee, to say to any viewers that happen to be professionals that I'm really, really happy to hear, the work that Forge is doing with professionals working with the community, including the parents, partners, family members, etc., and that how important that is. And that's one of the reasons why we're bringing Dee over here to Spain to do a training with our staff. Yeah. And there's always space for learning.
Right. I was going to say that's exactly right. That Facialteam is the real deal in that. They just don't say it. They do it. And they really, it's an honor. I cannot wait. And we'll talk about that in depth when I'm interviewing you and some of the others. And with Michael, to add into this part, Lil, I just was one of the questions I had asked on the panel, and this will be similar to that, Lil, I don't know if you got a chance, because it was really like a closed thing, is that based on your professional, you could add in personal, it's up to you, experience, how has violence against the trans and non-binary individuals impacted their lives, maybe your life, the lives of other people in your life? Any ways you want to talk about that?
Sure. That's a big, broad question, right? Of kind of how are things that impacted, lives personally or professionally. And I know one of the things that I mentioned the other day, and several of the other panelists did too, is that many of us can't imagine or don't know of anybody in the trans community who has not experienced some form of violence, and it could be, I don't want to say small forms of violence, but it could be small harassment or microaggressions up to, very severe violence, physical or, or fatal even. So, I think all of us have experienced some level of violence if you're connected to or part of the trans community. Is this a good time to talk a little bit about rates of violence and?
Sure. I'm trying to keep it broad because I know you have so much to say, and I know being on part of a panel, you had to wait for others. This is the Michael hour.
Right.
This is all about you and the work that you do, because I really feel that what you do is so important, and I wish we had 4 hours. So go ahead, however you interpret what I asked. Keep it going. It's good with
All right.
me.
Cool. Yeah, because we could talk for 4 hours or 4 days or something like that. So, so let me just frame things for folks who may not be familiar with the rates of violence. So we can look at statistics, and I'm always hesitant to share statistics because when something happens against one person, that's really what matters, right? I mean, it doesn't matter if 100,000 people are experiencing it or one person is. If you're a provider and you're sitting across the table from that one person, that's all that matters. So when I'm sharing statistics, I think it sometimes paints a good picture for folks to just kind of have in the back of their mind. But again, when you're working with somebody, that's the person that is the only one that matters in that interaction. So taking a broader look back and looking at kind of the statistics that we do have, they're quite profound in a lot of ways. So when we look at rates of intimate partner violence, or what used to be called domestic violence, over half of trans people have experienced intimate partner violence at some point in their life. So that's substantially higher than the general population. When we look at sexual assault, the rates are even higher. So 66% up to 70, 80, 90, depending on which research you look at. So there's a lot of sexual violence that's happening, some targeting people because they're trans, some just who knows why the rates are higher. But again, that's a significant number of folks who've experienced sexual violence. We can look at stalking, and stalking has even less research in general, and basically next to no research that's trans specific. But we think that it's around 20-21% based on some research that has been done. And again, that's significantly higher than the general population, at least here in the US. Don't know about Spain, but I know about US comparative data. So those are 3 examples of statistics that are really, impactful. And so when, service providers are working with trans folks, those are important things to know. So whether it's people at the facial feminization clinic, or whether it's, a therapist or anybody, that information is really important to just have in the back of your head, even if that information doesn't get shared overtly. We could talk a little bit about sexual harassment as well. And there's some interesting changes in the laws in the US, at least, which make sure that sexual harassment includes gender-based harassment based on gender identity or gender expression. So it's kind of an interesting way that the law has been interpreted, which is a positive. But again, we can go back to how many trans people experience sexual harassment at the workplace, on the streets, and it's a lot. It's a lot of folks. So all of that work is a daily part of Forge's work. That's our day in and day out kind of work. And, again, like I mentioned, in the past 10 years, 10, 15 years, we've really focused on working on educating providers, because we cannot, as a community, feel good about saying, oh, community members, you should go see this provider, if that provider is not informed. So we feel that it's our job to make sure that the providers that we can reach, however many we can reach, the thousands and thousands that we have reached, are better informed, so that when the trans person walks through their door, there's going to be a better level of respect and understanding that happens.
I feel like you read my mind, because I had just had a conversation with Lil about when I'm going to be doing the training. And I said, the thing that we have to start with is the before they walk into the door, and we have to do a whole portion, right, Lil? That's what I was saying with you. And it's exactly right that when a person is reacting in a particular way, I mean, it's all trauma-based, right? It's all, right. Most of it is, I'm not a trauma specialist at all, but I am familiar with other people in my life who teach me about this. And we have to understand the person that's walking in has a whole history before they walked in to be treated in your clinic or in your classroom or in the relationship they're in now. They've had a history before. When you're going to end up being intimate with someone, what history did that person bring into your bedroom or into your holding hands even? And it's very important to have that knowledge before somebody's treated or before somebody becomes close with someone in any way, even in a friendship way. Some people,
totally.
they don't even want you to touch their shoulder. And I'm a big toucher, you know, and I've had to learn as a teacher, some kids, they don't even want you to, you know, tap them on the shoulder if they were, and it's just, and that's what your work really brings to the forefront to people, that we have to meet a person where they're at. And that's what you know, in the workshop, I remember talking about that. And so I want to speak a little bit about barriers. Oh, Lil.
Just wanted to interject, going back to the statistics about Spain. You said it was 21%, you said, for sexual
for stalking?
For stalking, right?
For stalking.
I'm not sure if that's a statistics which they're compiling in Spain, but the national or the federal association here in Spain has published in 2020, I think is the last statistics that they have that are published, although at the European level, they're doing a lot of really good work compiling statistics on these kinds of things. 16%. So the situation here in Spain is not that different from the US.
Great.
That's interesting. Yeah.
And stalking is horrifying. It's debilitating, living in fear like that all the time. And sometimes you can't even have a recourse until sadly something happens. So it's just, it's terror. And a person has to, you know, somehow function in their life. And I guess, you know, I'm sure the work that you do helps that. And, you know, that's what I was bringing up a minute ago about barriers. I mean, what barriers do people then face, that trans and non-binary survivors face? Those even stalking while that's going on. And, you know, some of the barriers I remember us mentioning a little bit on the panel was, you know, structural ones, community ones, culturally imposed barriers. So maybe you could touch on those three or others that I haven't mentioned. I know when we talked about it, those were some we discussed.
Definitely. So there are a lot of barriers. I mean, I really want to make sure that we talk about resilience at some point in this hour, but I mean, I think that it's really, really important to talk about barriers, because how do we get to resilience if we don't talk about what the barriers are and then how to overcome some of those barriers? So when we look at general barriers, so when we're looking at these types of crimes, so sexual assault, domestic violence, stalking, these more kind of personal, intimate crimes. There's a couple of things that are kind of systemic in general. So I'm going to kind of blend them together for a second. So a couple of things are the language that we have grown up in. So all of us hear words like violence against women or gender-based violence. And what that does for trans folks is say, well, if I am not a woman, if I don't identify as a woman, if my perpetrator wasn't a man, it must not count. What happened to me didn't count because I don't fit into this paradigm that's the dominant cultural narrative. So I'm not saying anything bad about the language of violence against women as a whole. I mean, it had its usefulness in bringing awareness and all of those good things, but it really erases the experiences of most trans folks that just don't see themselves in that parameter. Some of the barriers too, when we're looking at sexual violence, intimate partner violence, is the vast majority of services are sex segregated. So it's a women's only shelter. It's a women's only support group. Sometimes there's men only support groups. That certainly doesn't help any non-binary person who would have to choose, you know, which gender of these two binaries to pick. But it also is really a disservice to trans people who may not feel comfortable in a gender segregated space or might experience even more violence in that gender segregated space. So, I mean, that's a structural thing of like, how do we deconstruct that? And how do we create safety that's not based on gender? Like, you know, we don't have to have gender be the variable that creates safety, because it doesn't. It inherently does not create safety to have a women's only space. We think it might, but it doesn't. So, and that expands not just to, you know, shelter or support groups, but, you know, if you think about like yoga groups or places that do other types of healing or other types of fitness or wellness, a lot of times they're divided by gender as well. So when we look at some other structural barriers, in the US, we have a lot of federal laws that were kind of rolled back and people lost protection. And that was under the former administration. And I'm speaking today not being, I'm speaking today as a person that is not under a grant funded role that I can't be a little partisan. So I'm going to be partisan and say the Trump era really did some nasty and hard things for trans folks at the federal level. So Department of Justice, Title IX, which protects students, Housing and Urban Development, Department of Education, all of those things, we had rollbacks. And fortunately, with Biden, we've had some of those things put back in place. So there's protections, because those top level protections are really important. So anybody that's funded through those agencies has to abide by the non-discrimination policies within them. So we can talk about whether that's a good or bad thing, because sometimes people, even if it's the rule, they don't necessarily abide by it. All right, so that would be a whole nother conversation that we could have. Let me mention a couple of other things that are systemic, and then maybe a couple that are community-based. So when we look at systemic barriers, law enforcement is a huge systemic barrier, and that's true for non-trans folks and trans folks. But a lot of times people that are trans, get stopped for walking while trans, or just walking down the street, and cops presume that they're engaged in sex work or other things like that. And that's another whole ball of wax, because, should sex work be illegal? I don't think it should be. A lot of people don't think it should be. But there's a lot of negative experiences with law enforcement. So if somebody wants to report what happened to them, it almost always causes more harm to report to law enforcement, because what law enforcement do on top of what harm they already experienced. And that's the same as the criminal justice system. So criminal justice system is not really just, it's not justice for most people. And there's a lot of baggage that goes with it. And that's true for non-trans people as well. I mentioned sex work and street economy based things. So again, if somebody has experienced sexual assault, for example, while working as a sex worker, a lot of times they aren't going to be treated the same way as somebody who wasn't engaged in sex work and violence happened. Some of the other structural things are really around like anti-trans legislation. And again, I know the US is really full right now of municipalities and states that are trying to enact anti-trans legislation. So that affects people's wellness and the amount of sexual violence and domestic violence that's happening within our culture. And the last systemic one is the pathologizing of trans people. So we have standards of care, and there's a lot of arguments about the usefulness of standards of care and if people are diagnosable or not, but that can really impact people's ability to access care. Okay, I'm gonna take a breath now. Can we talk a little bit about community barriers before we move on?
Yes, go ahead, Michael. I'm totally listening to you. I'm with you 1,000%. Keep going.
I just know I've spent a lot of time
filming.
No,
this is very important. This is why it's an education platform. I keep going.
Okay, all right. Let's talk about community barriers.
Ears.
Good. Thank you. And I was hoping that my voice would stick up this morning. I've had a lot of trainings this week. So community barriers. A lot of times trans folks, because trans communities are small and stigmatized, don't want to come forward about being assaulted in some form of way, because they don't want the community to look bad. So, I think trans communities want to put the good foot forward to the public. So if trans folks talk about intimate partner violence, for example, which might happen with another trans person, with another LGBT person, it sends a message to the public that, oh, look at those trans people, they're not so angelic. So that's a concern sometimes with people coming forward. Another one is that small nature of the trans community, and that can be in big urban cities or in people that are in smaller communities. But not every trans person knows each other, but every trans person knows each other, right? There's a commonality, and people do know who each other is in community. And so when something is happening to one person with another community member, for example, it is public. It's public within that trans community, and that can be really difficult. So people may stay quiet to not have their business aired publicly within the community. And also related to that smallness of community, that kind of, that I don't want to call it incestuous because that's reinforcing a word that I don't really mean, but there's oftentimes no place to go that is safe. So if everybody knows everybody, if everybody uses the same pool of, for example, therapists, it makes it difficult to then access those services when victimization has happened. So there are some bits and pieces within that. Let's look at the culturally imposed barriers. There are still a lot of providers that make assumptions about causality or correlation between people being trans and the violence that happens. And sometimes there is a correlation, sometimes there is a connection, but the providers that are just automatically assuming, that's where some of the challenge comes. I think some other things that are culturally based are many folks in the trans community kind of presume that they're going to be experiencing things badly, that they will not have a good, healthy life, that of course they're going to be abused or assaulted or harassed. So some of that is just not giving kids who are trans like the self-confidence, the self-worth that says, you are a valuable, important person. You do not deserve to be abused or harmed in any way. And so, I mean, I hear this especially with trans women who say, well, being sexually assaulted proves that I'm a woman. So that goes back again, right, to the violence against women paradigm. And of course, it's like, no, nobody should be sexually assaulted. But for some trans women, it's like it almost validates their identity as a woman because they've linked being a woman with being sexually assaulted. So it's an interesting dynamic. It's heartbreaking, but it's interesting.
I think it's kind of horrifying, Michael. Can I just interject something?
Yeah, totally, because it is.
I have so much to say. I just don't want to interrupt you. I mean, all these barriers, we're not even getting into racial barriers that are connected to the community, social, economic, ableism, and the other things that came to mind when you were speaking is for those, I mean, what was brought up on the panel the other day, in fact, those that work in the community, you, me, Lil, sometimes everybody's so doing the work that everybody's mental health and what we're doing, and you're saying the pool is small. And so when you're looking for mental health providers or medical health providers and you want your privacy kept, sometimes you have to say, or let's keep my private life a little more private. You might know more, but if we're speaking on a public way, can we just keep that a little quiet? Because it's about safety. And I remember Christina was saying how on the panel with us.
like Christina who, right? Yeah.
Right from the panel. Christina Herrera, she was saying how we have to ask each other and check in with each other because it was true. And I agree with her. And that's something that you were alluding to a little bit there about, the community being small and we all know what's going on and trying not to panic and still do the work. I mean, people in different states now, that's where it's like for them. Should they stay? Should they not stay? And also another barrier, and, Lil, I know that Facialteam is very well aware, is like medical trauma and how that plays a role of people not getting services and not going to get help, especially in the trans community, non-binary community. It could start from walking in the door with the forms, and it could go all the way down to people using the wrong name and pronoun as they're examining somebody, or asking to be examined in ways that absolutely don't relate to the reason why they came in. You're getting eyeglasses, why do you ever take your pants off? You know what I mean? Or know what's in your pants. I mean, because people become curious, and I always say, there's an internet for that. And so I just, just to interject with the barriers, there are so many, but I do want to, and if you have some other point you really feel strongly about, interject it in some way, but I just don't want to forget about talking about the resilience. And I have a question that I would love to pose to you about if you could talk a bit about the trauma-informed care and non-traditional healing modalities, which help with the resilience that you use in your training, both with the trans and non-binary survivors you work with, but also with the providers that use them. I mean, and if you want to add more to resilience besides the methods you use, feel free.
we could be here for 4 or 5 days, right? So, yes, we care deeply about trauma-informed care and approaches. We also care about that empowerment focused. And again, that's with providers, that's with community members. So one of the things that I'm always challenged with is trying to define what trauma-informed care is, and it means different things to different people, right? So it's an ever-changing thing, but just to kind of give a framework of what trauma-informed care is, it's an approach that really looks at harm reduction as I think as a core. At least that's my take on it. And it evaluates all of the different components so that when violence is playing a role, we want to make sure that the interventions integrate well into that person's life so that we're not imposing our structure onto somebody, but that we're listening, we're responding, we are aware of the impact of trauma, both in the moment and what people have experienced. So it's taking in like the whole person and the whole system that the person is living in. Not a very good definition that I just gave, but we really need to look at like the whole structure of who that person is and what they've experienced and not causing additional harm. And I thought about this because, you'd shared some of the questions ahead of time and you asked kind of like, how does that play out in our trainings or how does that play out in our spaces? And I was like, well, I don't really know how to answer that because when I focus on training, I think about how do we make it a friendly adult learning environment. And I think by doing so, that inherently becomes trauma informed. So when we try to do work with people in an audience, whether it's this audience or a workshop with 500 people in it, or, with 10 people in it, if we can create a space that feels safe enough, a container that will hold people's current knowledge, expanded knowledge to what we're going to end up with, we've created a trauma-informed space. We've created an empowerment space. And I think that goes along with, like, we don't have a top-down learning strategy. And I think you kind of referenced that. If you came into our workshop, you didn't necessarily feel like, I was here and you were here. It's a joint learning experience. And so I think that's part of what is so important with how we train and how we work. Let me just add a couple of other things about it, because I think that like your question was really interesting to me about like, how do we use it in our training and how does that go forward? One of the ways is that I like to ask more questions than provide answers. Now, I can provide a lot of data for folks, but I want people to start thinking about the questions that they have. Ask them in spaces that are appropriate, but more than asking them, just to think about what does this question mean? What does this concept mean? And I really like people to touch and hold and be with the content that we're talking about. And so by doing so, it allows people to really embody what they're learning. So it's not just, oh, I learned this word and this word means this. That doesn't mean anything, right? We can have people memorize terms and definitions, which nobody agrees on anyway. But what we really want people to do is to understand what the life is like of somebody else that may have a different experience, or understand how their life is similar to somebody who we think has a different experience. So to really immerse themselves and feel like that content is part of who they are. And if they do that, they are going to be trauma informed. So
exactly, Michael. It's the humanizing of it all, and that seeing that we are all interconnected, and that when we have that mobile, if it affects one of us, it affects all of us, and not seeing anybody. All those when I do my workshops, that's exactly where it is for me. And the other part with that is the things that I learn as much when I teach as I give. And the terminology, people are often asking me when I run panels, do things, can you just give us all the definitions ahead of time? And so I will give some definitions, because it is you do need to understand what cisgender is. Mm-hmm. And people, after this, some people write me and say, what is that? What does this term mean? And I often say it's easy to look up, but somebody thought I said six genders. So I had I'm like, I said I had 6 genders. I was thinking, what could I? And then I said, oh, cisgender. Yeah. So anyway, more and that the what it comes down to is reflecting and looking at your own history. That's why all of the books are the reflective workbook, because everything I start out with is the reflective responses and to ask questions, because from that makes a person look at themselves, their own biases, their own knowledge that they don't have yet. You know, there's this whole movement with yet, and I agree with that. I've always felt that way. And that in order to have allyship and it's everybody, I mean, within the trans community, within the LGBTQ plus community, all of us to be allies and work together as a team. And so I completely agree with you about the reflective aspect of this. So what you want to talk more in depth about the resilience, because I know that's, you know, I mean, I could talk about resilience forever, but I want to give you the platform to do it through your lens and your experience based on your work with Forge.
Sure. And I'm looking at my notes and going, oh my gosh, which question is that?
Well, you brought up the resilience, so that's why, you know,
no, it's all good.
I want to honor your request. You know, when I say some topics or things we might do, and for the audience members, you know, I never feel that a person should be surprised. And so I never do. And I hope never that I will. And so I always just give ideas of topics. But since you brought up resilience, I also want to honor your request.
I appreciate that. So I was just like, oh my gosh, we didn't ask that directly. So there's a lot that we could talk about with resilience. And I think by the very nature of who trans folks are resilient. It's hard to live in this world as a trans person. It's hard to live in this world with a trans person with pick the other identities that people have. So, I mean, you mentioned intersectionality. So trans person who is a person of color, who is disabled, who is of a non-Christian religion. I mean, we can have all of those things, and to just simply operate in the world is resilient.
Right. We also have to include ableism. We have to talk about size, size, moving in a space, because those are often forgotten, and they also are greatly impacted. Talk about resilience.
Yes. They totally are. And it's like, you know, a lot of the challenges to resilience, I'm going to try to not focus on the challenges of, but are really the society's reactions to people and how that inhibits people's resilience. So, I mean, I think that there's a lot of things that we can do to encourage resilience. We need to just kind of, first of all, recognize that people are resilient. So to not presume that people are not resilient is a disservice to folks.
You look at the Ukraine right now. You want to talk about resilience. That is the definition. To anyone listening, that we can't do enough. We got to do more. Okay, keep going. I'm sorry. I just listened to, you know, Zelensky's speech, and it's just beyond. Okay, keep going.
And it's a perfect example, though.
Yeah, so resilience. Go ahead, Mike.
It's a perfect example. So yeah, we can think about the people in Ukraine, and that's just a prime example of resilience. So, you know, I think that we could talk about resilience here in kind of what can the other people around the trans or non-binary person do to help support that resilience. And it can be really simple things. I oftentimes train and I say, like, here are the 10 free and easy things that you can do. And I always create a different list basically for every training, depending on what it is. But we can all do things that don't cost us any money to support and uplift and embolden resilience. And that might be introducing ourselves with, you know, hi, my name and pronouns are, and inviting that with somebody. That's a really simple step that we can do in any setting, any place. We can do things, and this is going to sound really corny, but we can say, you know, wow, that dress looks really good on you. Or, wow, look at that, you know, or you can say something that seems kind of trite, but it can really help people feel better.
Michael, I just want to add something in that in some settings, saying that a dress looks nice on somebody, they would rather you phrase, I like your dress. Right. Because we want to make sure that in certain places, that's the, I mean, you know that, I know you know.
Yes, and thank you for clarifying that.
People say, yes, I like that dress, and then somebody say, oh, I got it here, or, you know.
Exactly. And I the way I said it was kind of objectifying or whatever, but, you know, whatever your relationship is.
Putting it out there because we want to be Go ahead, keep going.
No,
But
totally,
you're
totally,
so
really good.
sensitive. I know I could just say that to you.
It was Women's
Right.
Day this month too.
I know,
Yeah,
that's
I know,
why
right.
I would be remiss. I would be remiss.
Okay, so I probably should have framed that in a different way with a different gender person, but but
We forgive you.
commenting
I
on.
just want to say this is the way the exchanges go in his workshops.
Yeah.
Is that people are free to say, oh, could it be this way? And he's always so humbling and welcoming, saying, you know what? Oh, okay. And I know that when I do my workshops, that when I phrase things or I pronounce people's names wrong, I mean,
Yeah.
it's clear that I have a challenge with this, right? I say names wrong all the time. I love the human being. I can't say the names. I don't know. It's a learning challenge, and it's okay. But the point is that we all have things, and and the trainers don't know everything. We know enough, but when other people, there might be something in a training that somebody, not maybe, always is things
Always.
that people know that I don't know. And I'm like, oh, thank you. Like I said before, I do things so that I learn when I train. So continue,
Exactly.
Michael, and thanks. Oh, and Lil's finger. Go ahead, Lil.
I got a question, if I may.
Yeah.
When talking about the trainings and things that come up with, with the professionals, and part of my job is listening to the community. And recently, one person said, when I go into these consultations, the FFS consultations, and I'm forced to see photos of myself, and it's so triggering. And I thought, gosh, what can we do? It's a necessary part of the analysis, but what can we do to soften that, to make, I guess maybe just, perhaps we're already doing it, I don't know, but I know that our doctors do a very good job. So perhaps they're already saying something like, I'm sorry, we're going to put your photos up on the screen now. It may be triggering, and we apologize for that, but it's a necessary part of the process. Are you okay with that? Sort of giving them a chance to say no.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. I think did you have more to add to that?
No, that's it. So I would just like your feedback on that.
No, I think that's great. Right. Because we used to, at Forge, we used to call it know and tell why, which is not the most descriptive of terms, but it's like, you tell people why you're going to ask them a question. You tell people why you're going to do something, so it can help them feel less triggered, right? So it's like, hey, part of our process here is we put pictures up, and, if you want to look away, that's okay. Or let's feel how we can do this. Let's talk about how we can do this so that it doesn't upset you as much, but we want you to have the best surgical result or whatever. So like, by telling people why, sometimes that really helps, right? Or giving people some options of saying, oh, well, I don't really have to look at this. I could look at it from the side, and that's enough, but I don't have to really be traumatized by it. So yeah, I mean,
and ask them to provide some of the pictures that they feel most comfortable showing of all the uncomfortable pictures, which is the least uncomfortable, and have them be, I mean, of course you can't get the pictures.
They're our own pictures, we take them, so
right.
They don't get a choice.
Okay.
That's what I was saying, like turn away a little bit.
It's so funny. I've had surgery recently, and yes, they took the pictures. You're correct. And I remember thinking my pictures would have been much better. So maybe that can be part of the process, to say, why don't you bring in some of your pictures? We'll show you what we have. And I often take a moment to talk to a person, even because some partners bring pictures when I do workshops and do things, to talk about what they feel they're going to miss after their partner may have a particular surgery, or once hormones start, or making a tape of a person's voice before they start any hormones, just so that they have that. And that we slowly talk about, if it's a person who's having the actual surgery, then saying, this is to help you get to here. So let's focus more on the after picture, and this is going to be part of your past. So just know, when you're looking at that's what I'll talk about with the training. This is part of your past. And in order to get where we have to go through this, because the only way through it is through it, as they say in trauma. And it's the same thing here. So, but I think informing people a little ahead of time it's going to happen. And Michael's point about the whys, I mean, even when in the classroom, I do that for so many reasons. I hate we have to do this test, everybody, but this will let everybody see how much you know. And so we know how to help you afterward. So it's the same way. I mean, it happens in all instances. And I'm sure that if it's done in a respectful way, it'll be received much easier. But it doesn't, by acknowledging that the trauma it can cause, acknowledges an understanding of where it starts. And I know of people who've gone to Facialteam that have told me you've been fantastic about that aspect. So, I mean, you know, some of the people I talk about. So, Michael, do you want to finish that? Because I have a few other questions I'd like to ask you. We were talking about resilience.
Let me pick up just a couple of points of that, because like, I mean, I love this example because it's a great example. So, I mean, like, you know, how to be trauma informed and improve resilience is really about things like saying to somebody, hey, you know, this can be really traumatizing, or this can be really upsetting. And like, D, what you just said about like, let's look at the forward thing. Let's look at what you want. And maybe the part of resilience that is shared in that interaction is, you know, hey, we can take a break. We can take a pause if you get upset, or if you're feeling badly, you know, and you share with them like how much your professional team cares about their outcome and cares about their feelings, and all of those things build resilience, right? Of just being aware and being human with people. So, I mean, we could talk about resilience more, but I just think there's, you know, just even in that example, which is really a clinical example, and we don't think about surgery as like, oh, well, how does somebody show their resilience in this space? Well, there's a lot of ways that we can build up resilience, as well as a lot of ways that we can just, you know, let that person's resilience come through, even if they're having a hard time with what's happening. So
right, because you know, Michael, it goes back to like, I mean, no, we're not mentioning them all. Your list of 10, you know, we could have a list of 50, but if you set the stage before a person walks in, and you do all the ways that you've shown to help a person's resilience, and to show allyship and support, emotional support. And I mean, I know you have on staff all types of people with mental health backgrounds that go in, they talk to the partners, Gil, I know that, and all the family members, and that you set up a safety net. And Michael's, of course, taking a break. And I mean, brilliant. I'm so glad you brought it up. And listening, right, Michael? We talk about that all the time when we talk about the listening aspect of it. So let's talk about a little bit, because we only have a few minutes left. I have so many other questions. Is there other things? I know you mentioned, you know, that you're part of the trans community. You implied that with your groups that you've talked about earlier. So have you or others that you know have had obstacles that you had to overcome in your professional life, like as an executive director and creating projects that you envision, maybe gaining funding, or other barriers that you had to overcome to achieve what you've done? Because you want to share a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, totally. So in a lot of ways, I have not experienced a lot of barriers. And I think that's something that doesn't get talked about a lot, because we hear in trans community spaces that life is always hard, families reject people, and we don't oftentimes hear the narratives of my family was cool. In my case, my family was cool, or, you know, some of the positives that happen. So there have been a few challenges, hardly any in my personal life, in my family life, which is really fantastic. I think one of the challenges that I face, which is kind of a personal challenge in a professional setting, is that because I do trans work, people assume that I'm trans. I oftentimes don't disclose that I'm trans in training spaces because it's irrelevant. It has nothing to do with my professional role in training. I don't get offended if somebody assumes. I don't get offended if, you know, whatever happens. But I just think it's an interesting obstacle of people presuming that the only folks that can do trans content are trans people, which does a disservice to all of us that are doing the work. And, you know, Dee, you mentioned the word allies, and I'm certainly not against the word allies, but I oftentimes think of allies and go,
I think allyship, really, I'm not really saying
allyship.
An ally, allyship, right. People that are supporting others. And I do feel that, and that people in the trans community, employment is very difficult sometimes, and can be, not always. And as you're saying, you created your own space, and that I think it's very important for cisgender people like myself, people of white privilege, and all the things that go along with what I'm privileged, is to create spaces and allow, if I'm training, I want to include people that are, when I do with partners, it's really for partners, and there are partners in the group that are trans or non-binary, and their partner is transitioning and have feelings and thoughts about it. People think that isn't true, but it very much is often, or could be. I don't want to say often, but it has been often that I realized, but that so when I think of allyship, I think
Mhm.
of absolutely, yes, I feel everybody has a value to add, but I should not be speaking for the trans community in isolation, especially it's not my
Mhm.
right
Mhm.
anymore. I mean, I'm okay sharing what I know, but I haven't lived in the shoes of others that have gone
Totally.
through. And so I feel that yes, you don't need to disclose ever, but
Mhm.
but when you do, it also makes you visible. You know,
Right.
visibility this month, right?
Yep.
Is that it's
Yep.
very know that it's very important that people, as you're saying, you're changing the misnomer about that everybody's family doesn't support them,
Right.
but you're also showing that everybody is employable. Please do not count, disregard me because my, you know, my gender affirming gender doesn't match what your somebody
Yes.
employer thinks has to be binary and clearly represent what they've learned as in school or in
Mhm.
society. So
Yeah,
keep going,
totally.
Michael. Sorry, I
No,
just want to
totally.
object
No,
about it.
I
I'm not
agree with
talking
all of that.
about allies. I'm talking about
Allyship.
using what privileges I may have
Yes.
to remind others, well, we have to employ
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
and give work to people to do training.
Exactly.
Okay.
And I just, it's interesting because, like you said, like I'm so fluid with language, right? And I think all of us who have been doing this work for a long time are really fluid with it. And language has changed, and the word allyship didn't really exist very many years ago. And it's funny because like I think about allies and allyship in terms of like, well, yes, those are important terms. Those I understand what that means, and it's important that we, like you just said, if people have privilege, to use that in ways that are affirming. But every time I personally think of the word ally or allyship, I'm like, well, it's just being a good human, right? To show up, to do things. And so in my own language, I've moved away from that concept. So I really appreciate what you're saying, and I it's totally valid, totally good. And that really works with some people's head. And for my head lately, it's like, no, let's show up for each other because it's the right thing to do. We're showing up together in it. And I really want to frame the world that way. And that's my personal, take on it.
Right.
Not where we're
And
going.
a lot, I agree with you. It is just being a human being. But within that human being, then if we're gonna not use it, the word ally, I'm not married to it in any way,
Yeah.
shape, or form. It's the idea then we need to speak up. When we see
Right.
something is wrong,
We got to say
regardless of who
something.
you are,
Yeah.
don't endanger yourself, but we need to speak up. We need to say something. We need to, I feel, I'm not speaking, I'm not telling somebody to do something.
Right.
I'm saying me as a human being, I
Yep.
feel, I mean, I know Lil is
Yeah.
stepping up with so many things now. It's up to
Mhm.
her to share what she does and doesn't want to do. But
Yeah.
let me tell you, the human being that is in Lil, I don't think people really even will ever know what
Yeah.
an incredible human being she is in every way. And Michael, I know this of you too, and that it is the human part, and that we all have to say something and not
Mhm.
leave somebody alone, and videotape or have a way in a school, or we talked about the other day, if you see that there's somebody that's being harmed in any way, or that they're not able to use the bathroom properly, go in and walk with them and help.
Right.
So
Right.
that's what I mean about
Right.
in when we have a team member, we have somebody in our corner, and we don't have to do it alone. And I think
Exactly.
that's the human part you're talking
Mhm.
about. And
Yeah.
I really don't care. I mean, that word
It's a
doesn't have
language.
to be.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So tell me, where do you see yourself or the future of Forge in 5 years? I know that's a complicated question. It's one of my favorite questions to ask, because I think that if we stay stagnant, and we just we don't move forward, and we don't envision, a lot of times when I write a plan, I write a 5-year plan, a vision
Yep.
plan. And I think, where do I want to be in 5 years? And what am I doing to help further myself and others around me to do that? So where do you see yourself? And then we'll probably close soon.
I would like to see myself without a job. I would like to see myself without this job. Let's put it that way. I don't think that's realistic, but I would love to not be doing anti-violence work, because I would love to hope that our world would not be so violent against trans people. And like you mentioned Ukraine before, like I wish that we could get rid of violence in our world. I don't think that's going to happen in 5 years. I do hope that our work continues to move in a couple of different ways. One is that the providers that we are currently working with are getting more woke, getting more with it. And it's really great to see the progression already of having not just 101 conversations with providers, but having 201, 301, 401 conversations and really creating systemic change for folks. So that's where I'd like to see things going in 5 years. In 5 years, I'd also like to see our work supporting trans folks, not in that crisis stage, not in that just desperate state that so many people are still in, not really related to violence, but just that rawness
and
of
being
pain
forced into again and being forced
Right.
into again.
Yes. And I would love us to move to a place where we could work more on healing, work more on, yes, these things happened. And let's work on creating a sense of wholeness, because some of the impacts of trauma are play out in terms of like people being angry or aggressive or isolating, and it's like, well, how do we help people who don't want to be in those spaces be in the world in a way that feels comfortable for them? So that's kind of what I was meaning by like not being in that crisis state, not being in that messy, chaotic state. I mean, certainly people are there now, but I would like in 5 years to have more of the work that we do really focusing on taking that whole person and helping them be more of who they want to be, knowing that they had trauma in their history.
I think in terms of when you talk about that layering, right? You talk about 101, 102, 3. I think that we always have to become aware that there's always going to be a 101 group. And that and that there's always going to be that this is new to somebody, but that as we create those other spaces, and it's just like it always goes, I'm always going to be a teacher. If I have a child come in my class and my lesson that day was teaching the ABCs, but that kid is reading like off the charts full words, and I don't need to spend that time with them, but to assess the people in front of you and the audience that's there. And then as we do these series, I am bringing, my vision has changed. It's shifted. Because I see that people had a lot of the basics, and I interject cisgender. That's the gender you assigned at birth aligns with your affirming gender. For those that really, I understand you may need that term explained to you, and that it is really important. I wish there wasn't violence, but going with the idea that it is, one of my dearest friends always says, let's sit in the stillness. Yeah. Let's just breathe. Let's take 5 minutes every day and breathe. And that is really hard sometimes. That is really hard. Sometimes when, I've had friends, I say, how could you not watch? And, I notice sometimes I can't watch the news all the time. Not that I'm going to be uninformed, but sometimes I need to just walk. And I have this in the book, just walk by the water, or just listen to a tape, or just eat a great ice cream cone. And for some people, I do like ice cream. And so in a sane way. And then, moderation, everything moderation. And so the truth is that we do need time to also help others. And I think that you can't give unless you replenish yourself, right? And that's what you're also speaking of, Michael. I think that, you're wishing it wasn't, because you want to see all the hard work that you've done make a difference, and hoping that the violence goes away. But I do know part of your resilience is understanding that may not happen. And so you have to be prepared. I want to know if there's any questions I haven't asked of you that you think I should have asked of you.
Well, I'd actually want to end possibly with one of the questions that you haven't overtly asked today, but we talked about it ahead of time, about kind of the what you just mentioned about like sitting and breathing with somebody, what people can do. I would love to wrap up with some of those concepts, if that works for you.
Yes. Can I just interject one question that I didn't ask that I do want to ask you, because of you having a team, that you have others on your team. It's not just you running this organization.
Oh my God,
and I think that we've talked so much about humanity, allyship, other people support. So I don't want people to think that you're doing this in isolation.
No, totally not. We have a
Yeah.
great team. We have a really great team. It's a very small team. We try to do really lots of work with our small team. So I'm a co-founder and executive director, which means that I do everything. Also on staff is Lori Cook Daniels, who is our policy and program director, also does everything.
And I saw her at the workshop. She was fantastic.
Yeah, she is. She's totally fantastic. Does most of our initial draft of writing of things, helps with programmatic design, is involved with policy work and aging. Those two things are separate. Shelley Gregory is on our staff, and they are mostly our Wisconsin direct advocacy person, but also does everything because we all do everything. Shelley is fantastic, a lawyer by trade, but a very gifted, wonderful person that will sit with anybody and be so incredibly patient. Other folks on our staff are Caleb Weinhardt, who is way out on the West Coast, and he is the jack of all trades. Some people would call him an administrative assistant, but he is far more than that. Again, somebody that's just rock solid and stable and just very stable. And two other folks that are part-time on our staff. One is Anoli Helper, who writes our blog posts for transsurvivors.com, so trans-survivor.com. And they are a fantastic writer. They used to do our social media. And then the other person that is, I still want to include on our staff is Tristan Taggart, who right now has transitioned off of our payroll and into hospice. And so they are a very warm part and a very tender part of my heart and our work. So that's our small team.
Thanks, Michael. I wanted to acknowledge that because I know how hard you all work. So I think a beautiful way to end would be to, yes, to like, is that what you're doing?
No. Link in the link to the blog is in the.
Link to the blog. Yes. So Michael, I think you're going to maybe do an exercise or something with us. Am I wrong? What is it that you're going to be doing?
Don't need to do an exercise, but I'd like to remind folks of the things that they can do, because I think sometimes people say,
Right.
you know, how can I be an ally? How can I engage in allyship? How can I show up and be a good human? And you know, you mentioned one of them, which is just to have that stillness and to be with somebody and to breathe with somebody. Let me just run through a couple of things. And so, some of these are like the 10 free and easy things, but they're just like, I want to get involved. How do I get involved? So let's start with yours, which is—
And Michael, I think that's a good term. How do I get involved? Instead of allyship of this, how do I support and get involved? So we'll use that. Okay, go ahead.
Doesn't matter what we use. We all have the concept, right? We want to get involved, be human, ally with people, whatever it is. So we can sit and breathe with people. We can sit and be in the same space with people. We can just do the Nike slogan of just do it. So create things, do things. If you see a need, stand up, step up, roll up, make a point to do it. If you see something that feels right to you, there's a lot of work that's still yet to be done. So if you have an interest or a skill in something, participate in that interest or offer that skill that you have. I'm really an all hands on deck kind of thinker. So, you know, collaborate with other people, find the trans groups in your city or your state, start idea generation, and then collaborate with other people. You know, find what your passion is, whatever that is, whatever sparks you, and do it. Be creative in terms of helping figure out what needs to get done. And remember that there's like a lot of ways to be an advocate or to do advocacy. And that can be like, you are the house on the block that every kid knows that they can come and get lemonade at, right? Because whether they're trans or non-trans, they know that you are the house that is going to welcome them. Or maybe it is making food for folks who don't have enough money or are recovering from surgery or whatever it is. Maybe it's accompanying somebody to the bathroom so that they can pee in safety, or to a medical appointment. There are just so many things that you can do. And like Dee, you mentioned on the panel the other day about like, if you're in a public space and want to know, kind of ask a Confederate question and say, well, where are the all gender bathrooms? Like you're educating that institution about like, well, that they should have them, right? And you're doing the work so that somebody else doesn't have to.
Right. That was the referral before I was making that, right? You remember saying that on the panel and going in and saying, you know, I don't see any gender neutral bathrooms here. Because
Right.
especially me, I can go and ask, and everybody's like, I'm like, but I don't understand. What do you mean it's not necessary? And then you explain why. You know, the
Why
why
it is.
that we talked about before.
Right. Right.
The why. Well,
Let
this
me
is
tell you.
this is why. And
Right.
keep going, Michael. You're doing
Yeah,
great.
no, those are those are the examples where we can step in when we have, whether we call it privilege or whatever it is, that we can make the lives better for somebody else. We can do things like
Yeah.
stuff.
Right. I
No, go
think
ahead.
in terms of education for teachers, and that teachers can do that. And as you're talking about the house on the block, you could be the teacher in the school.
Yes.
And I'm training a group from Charlottesville today in Virginia. I love this cohort there. I mention them often, and they seem to be the same day that I do this. So and you know, all that people are doing to as educators and taking risks and doing things, it's hard and it's scary sometimes.
Mhm.
And that we're not trying to minimize that it can be scary to do it.
Yeah,
And
it
that
can be.
again, do it in teams, do it knowing what
Mhm.
your rights are, having the people prepare things behind you so that you're not left by yourself, because we
Mhm.
never want to put anybody in harm's way, whether you're a person who's a support team or not. And Michael, adding on to your list, like some other things that I noticed that people can do is to ask things in a respectful way and think, would I want somebody to ask that of me?
Right.
And if the
Right.
answer is no, or would I want somebody to ask me that publicly or at
Mhm.
this moment in time? You know, why are you asking it? What's
Mhm.
the motivation behind it? And if it's something that you just want to know, then
Yep.
is there another way for you to get the answer to that question? And
Without
is it
asking
really
them.
that
Yeah,
important to the situation? How does that pertain
exactly.
to this moment in time?
Yeah. Yeah,
So
totally.
Lil, do you want to do anything else that Michael, have you
Let
you're
me add
good.
a couple more. Can I add a
Go
couple
ahead.
more?
Oh, I love
Just a
it. Go
couple
ahead.
more.
Sure. Go
So
ahead.
you'd mentioned the kind of like putting yourself out, so we could do things like stuffing envelopes or whatever. So people can do those things behind the scenes. You don't have to be out in public. But let me just end with a couple of really simple things that people can do. And this relates again to kind of sitting with people, being with people. One of the things that I always end with is like, we can be kind to each other. We can be caring to each other. And part of that can mean things like we can make eye contact. Because I think trans people are oftentimes either stared at or not looked at all. So how can we make eye contact? That's a really human thing. How can we touch someone if that feels acceptable and mutually, consensual? And how can we make sure that our body language is not like, pulled back when we're interacting with folks? And that can be with everybody, right? So it's how can we make that human connection with people? And how can we make sure that we do that equally with the trans folks that are in our life? So there's
Right.
a whole lot of things that we could talk about, but that humanness is really, really, really important.
And when a person may seem unapproachable or angry or not making eye contact with you, sometimes eye contact is hard for people.
It is.
And maybe, especially on the autism spectrum, it could be in particular, I'm saying, and that not to judge a person by how their body language is to sometimes, like everything else, ask, do you want a hug? And a person may seem like they don't want one, but their body language might not be saying it. So as a teacher, again, always be aware of that too. And this person may seem very welcoming for that, but they don't need one then.
Right.
They don't
Right.
want one then. So
And we always want to ask. We always want to ask. Yeah. And the same with eye contact. So, I mean, it's really about like what we're doing with the other person, whether they can refer that back or not. So
right.
Yeah.
Acknowledge a person in the room. I think that's your point. And not make anybody feel invisible, and let's lead that into, day of visibility, right?
Yes.
The 31st. Go ahead.
Yes.
Lil, do you have some things that you want to add? Because you've been so patient with me and Michael.
No, I'm listening attentively to everything you're saying. Just wow. This is amazing. And I think that the people who come back and watch our conversation today are going to take away a lot of really, really important information and tips and some vocabulary. So thank you so much, both of you, for being here and having this really, really interesting conversation about a topic that's so important.
I just want to say that Michael, I really thank you for the time that you gave on Monday, that you're giving today, for the work that you do. I have so much respect for you. I know that this is the beginning of us working together, and I'm really grateful for this opportunity to be able to create with Lil, who was a huge fan of yours before this even started. Also, I know you know that, to just really say how much we both admire you, Lil, if that's okay, because I know we talked about this.
Absolutely.
And really respect you and your organization greatly. And really, if you want more information, get in touch with Michael. I know they'll put all of the stuff, the links in the chat, and I hope that we know that. Okay, Lil, I'm not going to say anything else. I will not say anything.
Yes.
But I'm going to say thank you to both of you. Thank you for inviting me to the space. And this is a first for me to do a live stream. So like, woo, exciting. So
Woo!
I've done lots of different kinds of formats, but this is really fun. So woo, yeah, exciting. Thank you.
You have to come back again, because I was really interested in hearing a little bit more about the techniques that you use for healing. So that would be an awesome follow-up in the future.
I'm available.
Michael, you're a natural. Even though I said I was going to talk, I can't resist. You are a natural speaker.
Thank you.
Okay, Lil.
Absolutely. So yes, thank you so much to both of you, and to our viewers who have been here listening in on this 12th interview of DM Maynard's monthly series, raising awareness, especially during this month of Trans Day of Visibility, and for Michael Munson of Forge for sharing his expertise in the area of trauma. Stay tuned next month, of course, for our 13th episode. And remember to like, follow, and share this video with your lovely friends.
But wait, where will it be? Where will it be on
the 13th
April
episode?
20th?
The 13th episode will be with Dee and I together, physically together.
In Spain.
Here in Spain, yes, in our studio here. So that'll be quite an event. We're looking forward to that. And Dee is going to interview myself and one of our doctors, and possibly one of our coordinators. We're going to work out the details, but it will be a focus on some of the work that Facialteam does behind the scenes. So thank you for coming and seeing that and watching this video. And yes, remember to, what do you want to say, Dee?
Well, and also to understand that when you're going through surgery, the exemplar that they hold, and for other surgical teams to learn, and from people who are going for surgeries to understand what they can ask and what they can do, and to minimize any medical trauma. And then I think that the role is as much to let us see how amazing Facialteam is, as it is to show all the ways that Facialteam has worked hard to be a group that can do training for others, to show them what is possible.
Yeah, we do take very seriously the supporting the person as a whole that comes to us, and we have psychologists on our team, offer lymphatic drainage massage, which is very relaxing, acupuncture, extra nursing support, etc. Highly trained staff at the accommodations that really know how to attend to our patients in the time when it can be quite stressful. So yeah, it's not just about, someone coming and just the details of the surgery and, that specific, it's a whole sort of well-being experience.
More to come.
Yes, more to come. Stay tuned, and we're definitely taking away some information from this talk today that will inform what we talk about in the next episode. So yes, thank you so much again, Dee and Michael. And to our viewers, please like, share, and follow, etc. And remember, everybody, as I always end here with a big heart, never forget your health and happiness matter. Bye-bye.